cybersecurity for the modern era. And for this, I would like to invite on stage Maninder Bharadwaj, who is SVP and Global Business Head, Cybersecurity and Risk Management at Tech Mahindra. Giving a brief introduction, Maninder has over 2 decades of experience in cyber risk and risk advisory consulting. Prior to joining Tech Mahindra, he has worked with Deloitte in US, India for 18 years. He is an avid learner and always likes to take on challenging objectives. He has been instrumental in building large practices, new accounts, and new service lines. With this, please welcome him with a huge round of applause.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible. It's great to be here, and thanks for this opportunity. Let me actually give you a slightly different take. I think all of you have been hearing of practices, you have been hearing of technical viewpoints through the day. So let me actually go back and look at what does cybersecurity look like at present, and what could actually be coming in the near future. And that's the two areas that I'm going to be basically focusing on, and in the interest of not rushing through a lot of material, I just have one slide that I'll be actually talking on. So let's go ahead and talk about cyber, right? And this comes in just as a background. We operate in 51 different countries, and that gives me a good insight into what is going on in different parts of the world right now. And some of those particular topics that I'm going to be discussing is not just about India or a particular part of the world, but how do we actually see it happening across the world? Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at globalization, I would say globalization in information security is the maximum that's basically there. One attack that takes place in one corner will be there in another corner in a few seconds or few minutes, that's basically there. So the first aspect that actually comes up, and very few of us actually go back and realize it, we have actually entered the era of hybrid wars. When we look at era of hybrid wars, what does it basically mean? In traditional sense, whenever we actually went back and talked about wars, it was boots on ground. So you would have people walking in, going back, shooting XYZ, and there would be some time the missiles and XYZ basically take to go ahead and get into a particular country. But when you look at the latest geopolitical situation that's going on, along with the boots on ground, you basically had a cyber attack that happened right at that particular point of time. And probably the cyber attack happened a tad bit earlier than the rest of the things that went on. So what did they focus on? Communication systems, bringing down satellites, BFSI systems, that was basically there. How do you actually go ahead and ensure that it's completely disrupted? ATMs not working. Energy systems that are basically there. And when you start looking at it in a broader scale, if at this instant of time, if we go ahead and say that, well, you don't have electricity, you don't have telecommunication, your life will be completely disrupted. So that is where a complete shift is actually taking place right now, focusing on the critical infrastructure rather than the smaller applications in XYZ that's basically present. And as we go ahead and look at it, and we work with a lot of very critical infrastructure organizations that's basically there, there are challenges that is basically there. And when you go back and look at one of the key aspects that's being looked at very keenly is governments are apprehensive about, hey, what is going to happen if my telecommunication system goes down, or if I'm going to go ahead and look at a very simple thing of energy systems basically going out. So if you're looking at energy systems, bless you, when you're looking at energy systems, you have transmission lines, you have the grid that is basically there, you have a lot of other components that actually go back and come in. And what would attackers go back and do? Right? The attackers are going to go ahead and pull down those particular critical infrastructure. Right now, if you basically pick up the news in the last 2 or 3 weeks, you'll realize that what is being attacked are the energy systems in those particular places. There's a very interesting instance, and this goes back to 2003. I was in New York at that particular point of time. For some reason, we lost electricity for 48 hours. I don't know how many of you would even know about that particular event. Everything went to a standstill. You would basically have no signals. We were scrambling around for candles, and thank God, we were, I think from Indian perspective, we knew that you could just pick up a little bit of a cotton, put it on a little bit of an oil, and we survived that particular 48 hours that was basically there. But how many of us are prepared if our Paytm does not work or the credit card does not work? I don't think most of us are basically prepared and even think about that particular scenario that is basically going to come in. But as soon as the communication lines go down, it's an issue. And a lot of times, the question about why do we have so much of regulation actually comes in, right? And there's a very interesting couple of regulations that have basically been picked up right now. Historically, as cybersecurity experts, we would go back and say, hey, zero-day exploit, we can't go back and block everything. So if there is a ransomware, if there are issues, you know we can't control it all. How many of you have followed that particular thought process? Lots of you. But the regulation, the sheltered harbor, comes back and says, that's in US, comes back and says, we don't care what happens, your data has to be available. So that's the change in paradigm that is basically going on as we basically go ahead and speak. If you look at the European Union getting into the DORA, that's a digital resiliency particular part of it. They're going back to that particular level and saying, yes, we don't really go back and look at whether you're able to go back, whether your primary or secondary, whatever data is basically there, if that gets encrypted or you basically go ahead and lose it, does not matter. By law, you are forced to go ahead and make sure your data is available at any point of time. And how many of you have actually gone ahead and seen countries who like to copy regulations? You see it start from one corner of the world, gets copied, right? At times, it gets copied a little in a delayed manner. Either the governments come back and talk about it, or you basically have the regulators going back and enforcing it, right? So in no time, you're actually going to start seeing those particular requirements come up over here. And if you're a global company, you're already going ahead and seeing some of those particular requirements come in. So that paradigm is basically going ahead and changing as we basically speak. And that's causing a huge amount of a concern back in the boardrooms. And if you have actually gone ahead and worked on, from a CISO role perspective, and I think a lot of us over here, our CISOs are working on CISO teams and all that. The key question that comes back from all the boards is, give me a holistic perspective of what is the risk that is there. And when that question comes up, we are scrambling for 30, 40 systems together and based on your environment to collate all that particular data, reconcile it together to go back and present something back to the audience. So what's happening right now is also going back and quantifying the risk. The ability to go back and say you have an exposure of 40 million, 50 million, that's basically there. And the ability, because most of you would have come back and basically try to answer this question to the board or to your senior leadership. Can I define what is the return on investment for security expenditure? Face that challenge? That challenge, which was unsolved till now, is being solved through risk analytics and going ahead and looking at risk quantification techniques, wherein you are able to quantify what is your residual risk, what is the risk that is coming in due to weak controls in specific areas. And that is where the quantification ability to go back and say, if I have X amount of money, where do I go back and invest it so that I can actually get the maximum return for my investment that is basically there. So that question is basically getting solved as we go ahead and speak. So you'll see that requirement come back from the boards a lot more. It's saying, give me quantifiable numbers. Security executives love to give a high, medium, low. The finance executive comes back and says, tell me the rupee number or a dollar number. That's where the gap used to exist, but everything is moving towards a dollar number. That's basically there. And while we are going through these particular areas, one very critical aspect that's also coming up is there's a lot of digital transformation. And when you're going ahead and looking at digital transformation, the key aspect that comes up is, are we embedding cybersecurity in the digital transformation, or is it an afterthought? And the problem that's actually coming up is, most of the times it is an afterthought. I've personally seen a lot of very large organizations coming back and saying, security is not in scope, right? And as soon as it gets closer to the deployment of the engagement, then everyone is actually going back and scrambling to get the security part of it going. That was quick. I don't realize I had 5 minutes. So jokes apart, I'll just speed up a little bit. But that's where a couple of other areas that are actually coming in from the digital supply chain that's being used as a conduit for attack. And I'll touch on one very important factor that's there, and everyone talks about 5G, right? And our perception of 5G is that we get 5G on our phones, right? That's a remit that we are basically going back and looking at. But looking at it realistically, there are a lot more of use cases that are there of 5G. Where is it being used? It's being used in mines for actually going back and connecting all the IT/OT systems together. You're basically seeing in various different environments, in hospitals, and various different use cases. And the ability to go back and embed security in that, products are still getting up to that particular level. So there is some level of a distance that needs to basically be covered on that particular area. And the other aspect that comes up with 5G is, the bigger the pipe that you give, the more the attacks that you actually go back and get. So you need to be prepared from that particular standpoint. There is a lot of discussion on ransomware versus data breach, and I'm pretty sure it's been discussed too much. So I'm just going to skip a couple of points over here. But when you're going ahead and looking at the zero trust architecture and the ability for the products to come back and have a conversation with each other, that is the new wave that is actually coming in. All the product companies are getting back into the platform journey that is basically there. So if there were organizations that focused on firewall, you're finding them get into cloud security posture management. You're seeing them actually get into an alliance with another set of companies to bring them together. So as security professionals, we are going to have a tough time in the next 1 or 2 years, because all the products will try to do everything. And just a trick question, right? Do you know who is the largest security product vendor globally? Microsoft. Right? A lot of times we don't realize that they do billions of dollars, to about $20 billion of business just on security that's there. And when you go back and look at all the other erstwhile products as well, everyone is basically getting into that particular journey of platform-based business. You're also going to come back and see a lot of the AI-based attacks that is there, automated attacks, but the most important factor that's still not solved in the industry as of now, your biggest attack surface, you'd have heard of attack surface management, technology, process, all that. No one talks about what is the attack surface from a human perspective. That's an unsolved issue that basically exists as of now. And that's an area wherein that will actually get in, because most of the times when you go back and look at attack surface, you go back and look at, can I do a red teaming exercise XYZ? But that is periodic. If there's a new system that basically pops up, the shadow IT, you're not able to go back and basically tackle the shadow IT in the right amount of time to block that particular attack. So that is where the agile attack surface management, bringing some of the human angle, is basically coming in. I'll leave all of you with one thought. Great discussion points, but we need humans to actually go back and do this. And that's a huge talent crunch that's basically there. So while all the attack vectors are going ahead and increasing, this is one angle that's going to be there as a biggest limiter. And I know that most of you will be actually going ahead and working weekends and nights because of the lack of talent that's basically there. Thank you and appreciate your time. I hope this was helpful.
Great. Thanks. Thanks a lot, sir.